an original MCM production.
Okay, thank you. All right, we by the way, this is our 30th anniversary this month. The second Saturday in February of 1986, this organization was founded. And so we are entering our 31st year. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Oh, you're helping your mom. Okay. Well, without further ado, we present to you our moderator, Mrs. Mildred Harpole.
Good morning. I don't need to introduce myself now. Lincoln Hills, Copper Lakes. It's the responsibility of this community. It's the responsibility of this community to nurture our children, to educate our children, and to protect our children, and especially when it's necessary to exercise humane, tough love. Today, we are going to hear what the status is in our Wisconsin juvenile correction system, and we will hear that from our state representatives, Mandela Barnes and Evan Gorky. After that, we will hear about the impact of the juvenile correction system on our community. And we will listen to Mr. Reed. After that, we will talk about the direction of the juvenile correction system, especially as it relates to Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. And we will hear from our district attorney, our juvenile judge, and from our county executive. So I will not have to get up again. They'll just come up in the order that I've just mentioned. I am disabled myself, so it's difficult for me to get up. Thank you.
So we're having a slightly different order here. The DA, Mandela, Evan, and the judge and I were talking about what would be the fastest, most efficient way to get the most information about what's going on. So I'm going to speak first and just how, sort of a bit of background on how this came up. And then the district attorney, and then Mandela and Evan, and then Mr. Reed, and then Judge Terciano. Before I start, though, I want to give another shout out to Jerry Lyday, the Jerry Lyday. Jerry, I don't know if you know this yet, but Thursday, when the president comes, you're going to be there. Some of you may know, recently Milwaukee won the White House Challenge. The White House Challenge was 20 communities in America with the lowest percentage of their population that had health coverage. And the challenge was who could get the highest percentage increase in covered population. We were one of the states that didn't take the Medicaid expansion, so Wisconsin was at a bit of a handicap. And yet, after the first quarter of 15, the second quarter, the third quarter, and we just found out the fourth quarter, Milwaukee was #1, won the White House Challenge, and here's the most important part of that. That's thousands and thousands more people who have health care coverage who never had it before, better care, and Jerry Lyday, who has done so many great things for this county, it shouldn't be a shock that you are one of a very small list of people that was asked. So you'll be saying hi to Barack. So I think that's worth a hand. So a couple of years ago, the county, which has a contract with Lincoln Hills, it's a state-run facility for juveniles. It's a large-scale facility of a type that doesn't happen too often anymore in the United States, largely because this type of facility regularly and consistently has very poor outcomes. Poor outcomes, what does that mean? That means 65% recidivism. 65%. Think about that. We are expensively making it more likely, not less, more likely that these kids are going to reoffend. One of the reasons people don't use these large facilities is because the range of risk and seriousness for this youth is very significant. There's a percentage of them that are very serious offenders, but there's a percentage of them that have much lower violations. There's a number of them that are up there on technical violations. You put that group of kids with the other group of kids, which is what happens up there, and that's a big part of how we get 65% recidivism. Second, as most of you know, Lincoln Hills is 3.5 hours north of here. For people, families who want to visit kids, that means you have to take off a day. 3.5 hours is a long drive, and that's incredibly difficult. It's also why they have an incredibly hard time hiring good staff up there, or staff that looks anything like the community they're serving. As you all know, there's numerous investigations going on right now. 2 years ago, the county started filing complaints and asking questions about issues we had with our youth, and we weren't getting answers. We found out fairly recently that our complaints are what prompted a whole bunch of the investigations that are going on right now. When the news broke that these investigations were happening, the next day, the DA, Judge Tergiano, who's the presiding judge of Children's Court, the chief judge, our head of behavioral health, our delinquency and court services. We basically quickly convened everybody who has some impact on the county, Lincoln Hills, and the kids we're serving, with the idea that number one, highest priority for all of us, highest priority is the safety and welfare of these kids. Two, and this is sort of the midterm, how fast can we get responsibly to a transition or interim way of dealing with these kids so they're not up there, but they're in a facility that is safe, no compromise in public safety, and has the level of programming that we expect. We operate similar programs, deal with similar youth, and the county has closer to a 10% recidivism rate, and I think we can all agree that's a lot better than 65. But even the very first day, all of us agreed, look, maybe it's the worst way that this could happen, but this opens a window for us to close a chapter that never should have been open in the first place. We never should have been sending kids up to Lincoln Hills. And what our hope right now is to get to eventually something close to what you've heard about, some of you may have heard about what's called a Missouri model. There's a number of models like this, but the idea is instead of one big facility that's very distant to oversight and visitation from the families and departments that it interacts with, to multiple smaller facilities where there's better staff, more intense programming, more easy visitation, more easy oversight for us. The county is paying the state right now a little over $300 per youth per day. We have a contract. There's a level of services they are meant to provide, and they are not providing them. But it's a lot worse than that. The stuff you've read about, some of the instances of abuse, of overuse of solitary, I mean, it's even worse, and there are instances continuing, or at least we're still getting reports. We are still asking for information regularly and not getting the kind of information or any kind of detail that we need. As you saw, the Secretary of Corrections, State Secretary Wall, recently resigned after the story about the issue that Racine had a few years ago, which should be shocking to all of us. And so now, starting in I think a couple days, there's a new Secretary of Corrections. The tricky part for us is right now this is a state-run facility, and so getting data on the kids has been difficult, especially when there's sort of a revolving door of personnel. I can tell you right now that the group we've had working with it share a number of principles that we're white hot about. We're not going to do anything, nothing, that's going to compromise public safety down here. So when you hear people say, oh, they're just going to bring all these kids down here and let them out, that's crazy. Nobody has ever suggested nor would allow that. But I'm not going to apologize for telling you right now, we can do a hell of a lot better than what is going on, and everybody is committed to getting as fast as we can to sending no kids up there. One of the reasons that there's been some resistance to the idea, we noticed in our data that we're referring less kids up to this facility already. We've been slowing down our numbers for a while because down here we're committed to evidence-based programming. You know, the kind of programming that empowers kids, that's individualized, recovery-oriented, as least restrictive as possible, again, without compromising public safety, and it works. We don't have to guess. But what has been happening is we're sending less kids up, and Lincoln Hills is holding them longer. They've been extending their stay. And I'll remind you, the part about we pay them $300 and something, about $320 a day per youth. And so when they extend them, that keeps, I mean, it's sort of a jobs program up there. And when you go up there and you talk, you hear some of the people saying, hey, you know, yeah, there's issues, but we want it to stay up here. So that's one of the dynamics at play. But right now, we've been meeting regularly, obviously, and we're going to continue to meet till we get a solution. In the meantime, we've already been sending our own staff, county staff, up there because we're not taking it on faith that things are better, even with all these investigations going on. We have our own staff going up, and we're sending up more, and we're going to basically, each of them is going to have a case for, we'll have every one of our youth monitored, so they will be up there north of Wausau. I mean, these guys are driving 3.5 hours, but it's, you know, for this you do that, you do what it takes to make sure that A, there's none of the abuse, none of the overuse of solitary. B, that the programming they're supposed to be providing, they are providing. They're getting the kind of medical care that they need. And we're going as fast as we can to make space down here. We've got some already. We have an interim. But again, we'd like to get to something a lot better, which will look a lot like the Missouri model. And just, you know, I know a lot of these folks, you're going to hear this from everybody up here, but we need your help. We need your advocacy, and we need your voice to support this. There's a lot of different folks who are kind of looking out for their reputation or covering themselves or worried about the investigation. We need to keep the heat up and not let people forget what's going on. And I think that we're going to hear more investigatively from the both DOJ and FBI and the other groups that are investigating. But we need to not lose sight of the fact that there are kids up there that deserve so much better than what they're getting right now. So thank you to the Brainstorming for having a forum on this. And I encourage all of you, ask questions and follow up. And with that, I'll turn it over to District Attorney Chisholm.
Well, thank you, Chris, and it's an honor to be here. I always think it's important to put things in historical context, and we are in a historical moment. We can make decisions as a community, as a state, that will either take us in a direction that I'm confident would produce better results, more public safety, less recidivism, or we can double down on failure. And what I would point out is, I had this discussion the last time I spoke here. We were talking about community corrections. And what I pointed out is that we had a moment in time in this state in the late 70s, early 80s, when we were trying to decide what would we do with the people that we decided as a community were not safe enough to remain in the community, had to be detained, had to be removed from the community. There was an argument that you should build facilities right in your own community. Why? Because you can then maintain relationships in the community, most importantly with your family, and after you have served your time, which the vast majority of all people do, including juveniles, and we'll talk about that, you serve your time, you come back in that community, and if your time spent is still physically in the community, you have a much greater chance of reintegrating back into that community and staying in touch with the important elements of your family and your neighborhood and the rest of your community. So we made a decision back in the 70s and 80s not to do that. So what did we do? We built the Dodge Correctional Facilities, right? And we doubled down on that. And in essence, what we did is we took our young offenders and we transported them to Dodge County and helped develop that system right there. Well, we had another moment in time in around 2010 when, quite frankly, because of some of the successful efforts made by the county to reduce the number of young people we were sending into detention settings, the state had an opportunity at that point in time to close down a facility. The argument that everybody up here made at that time is if you're going to close one of the two facilities, either at Ethan Allen or Lincoln Hills, close Lincoln Hills. Why? Because even though Wales and Ethan Allen wasn't ideal, it still required a commute from the community. At least it was close enough where you didn't have to send families literally on a 2-day-long sojourn just to have an opportunity to visit their child while they were up there. So we're in a predicament, and that predicament is that let's again understand what is the baseline definition for success in a penal institution. And one of the most basic requirements under the law, under the Constitution, is that you keep your prisoners safe. If that's the standard, that is not the standard of success, by the way. There's nobody in the correction system that believes that the only role for a detention facility is that you just safely detain people and you do nothing more than that. But if that were just your baseline standard, then we are experiencing an epic fail from Governor Walker's Department of Corrections as it relates to Lincoln Hills. It is an epic fail because what we know is that Lincoln Hills is currently under state and federal criminal and civil rights investigation. We've got approximately 150, I know the reports have said 160, that's a population that changed. We're down to about 150 young men that are at Lincoln Hills. They didn't get there, and let me point this out very clearly, they did not get there casually by any means. In other words, every child that is up there went through an extensive process where the community, the safety system, did everything it could to intervene and supervise them in the community, but at some point in time, we reached the point where they had to be detained. Now, again, there simply is not enough options and resources here in Milwaukee County. The secure detention facility here in Milwaukee County is designed for, in essence, pre-trial disposition. We've got approximately 120 young people there right now. Now, everybody in this room is also aware that we're currently undergoing a time in which a small number of juveniles are committing extraordinarily dangerous acts. Dangerous to themselves, dangerous to other people in the community. Many of those involved armed robberies, they involve thefts of vehicles, oftentimes the two of them combined. There's a close nexus between auto thefts and an expanding heroin trade. We're well aware of that. We're aware that this has caused significant harm in the community, and we're trying to address that. And when we say we're committed to the public safety, we understand that we have this small number of individuals that are committing a disproportionate amount of the harm. The model that has worked in other areas, and I'll say this right from the get, I understand that there's this desire to go to Lincoln Hills, and that's important that we do. It's important that you study failure so that you understand it and you don't repeat it. But what I would argue is our immediate concern is not to go and study failure. What we should actually be doing is going down to Missouri and going to Red Wing in Minnesota, where they've, since the 1970s and 1980s, fundamentally understood that the way you address juvenile crime issues is that you do it in your community, you do it in a small, well-resourced setting. So what the model, when they say Missouri, the Missouri model, what they're really talking about is multiple secure, non-secure, a full range of facilities that are staffed. The ratio is essentially 10 children to 3 to 4 staff members. 10 children to 3 or 4 staff members. And they get intensive supervision, and sometimes for the serious offenders that has to be in a locked facility. They have the equivalent of medium security, and then of course they have what we do have here, and is very effective for the vast majority of kids, is the concept of the wraparound services, where we can keep them safely in the community and address these issues in the community setting. So that's what we should be doing right now, is taking a look at models that actually work, because we know Lincoln Hills doesn't work. We fundamentally understand that. We've come to understand that we have to redesign our entire community corrections, both for adult and juvenile. But it is imperative that we do it. And I also want to just caution anybody that thinks that this can be done overnight, we'd be fooling ourselves. And we cannot allow the state to simply dump this problem on Milwaukee County. Because believe me, I think that that's in the back of their minds right now, is that they would like nothing more than to simply wash their hands of all of this, dump the problem on us with no additional resources whatsoever. And we cannot allow that to happen. This is going to require time. It's going to require time. It's going to require thoughtful commitment from everybody involved. But I'm confident that, again, we're at that moment in history where you can make that change. Let me also point out one thing that has come out of this, and it's consistent with what we've experienced in the adult system. Even a population, the population, say, of that 150, there's even a subset within that population that experiences severe mental health issues. These are children that are simply not properly in a setting like Lincoln Hills. They really need to be in a mental health facility, and they don't have the capacity at the state level to adequately deal with those children. So it should not surprise us then. Look, we did what we call the Sentinel Event Review. That we took a horrific incident, involved a juvenile offender that killed a young lady here in Milwaukee, and we broke it down from the day that kid was born until the day that incident happened, and we looked at how all the systems interacted. And the one moment of grace that we had with that young man was when he was he was severely mentally ill. And what we found is that when he was getting medication and getting intensive treatment, he was successfully complying with supervision. When he was released from that setting right there and off his meds, he was back on the street and he committed this terrible crime. So I think that as part of our ongoing efforts, we have to demand again that the state allocate more resources to our young people that are suffering significant mental illness. You have kids that are growing up in adverse childhood environments that are off the scales, and we can't keep fooling ourselves and asking ourselves, why do we have spikes in violence when we have kids that are growing up under layer after layer of adversity? And so we have to demand that the resources be put in across the spectrum, from education to public health, yes, community safety, but ultimately the cure-all of all of this is going to be community development. That means actual money to help build job-creating environment here in Milwaukee County. So that's where I'll finish. Everybody in this room is committed to treating our children humanely, effectively. It is the law. As frustrating as it is for people when they see a juvenile commit an offense and then they see that they're back out on the street. You hear that again and again. That's our system. It is predicated on the belief that punishment is not the priority of the juvenile justice system. Intervention, rehabilitation, and bringing those young people back into our community is the priority. So that's what we have to be committed to. I'm convinced that we can do it more effectively. It's going to take time. It's going to take resources. But we have to act now. We are acting now. We will do so in a responsible way. But it's going to take time. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Evan Goike. I'm a state representative over on the west side in the 18th Assembly District. With me is State Representative Mandela Barnes. We have to split our time today, so we're going to be up on the podium together. Bear with me for a second. You've heard a lot about why one big institution doesn't work. So I'm going to ask for some audience participation. If you please would, raise your hand if you have a kid or children. All right, now keep your hands raised if you pay attention to who your child or children hang out with. Okay, so why have all of the parents kept their hands in the air? Because it matters the company that you keep. So the idea of one big institution where a very low risk and a very high risk individual would live together in close quarters makes that low risk individual worse. Okay, the good kid doesn't rub off on the bad kid, it's the other way around. So when we put low risk and high risk folks together, the low risk folks learn bad behaviors and they come back to our community better equipped to be criminals than when they left. And so that's why Lincoln Hills has roughly a 65% recidivism rate, or 65% of the kids after 3 years after their release have committed a new crime. That's not good for the kids because they're getting locked back up, and that's not good for our community because our neighborhoods are where those crimes are being committed. So one big prison for kids doesn't work, and I'm confident in saying that because actually our adult system doesn't work that way. We don't have one big adult prison where low risk and high risk adults live together. We have low, medium, and high risk adult prisons, and so we should have the same for our juveniles. As to my second point, why do smaller facilities work better? You've heard a lot about staff to child ratios. The evidence would suggest that we need at least a 8-to-1 ratio, that is 1 staff to 8 kids. Currently at Lincoln Hills, they have a 28% vacancy for youth counselors. So their ratio of staff to kids is way out of whack. And what happens when you can't fill those vacancies and you have the responsibility of supervising too many individuals for one person is bad stuff happens, right? They can't possibly monitor 20 people when the evidence suggests that they should only be monitoring 8. And so kids have engaged in violence against kids, against staff, and staff against kids. And it is all started from spiraling this staff to child ratio out of where it should be, which should be 8-to-1. So Representative Barnes and I have proposed a bill in the legislature requiring the Department of Corrections to study what is called the Missouri model. And we don't really care if it's the Missouri model or the Milwaukee model or the Minnesota model. Whatever it is, it results in breaking down one big prison for juveniles and creating smaller regional institutions where this ratio of staff to children can be reduced. And these services can be intensified and individualized for kids that need it. So low-risk kids have different programming than high-risk kids. And as District Attorney Chisholm just mentioned, individuals with serious mental health disorders can get that treatment, and children that don't have that diagnosis don't need to get that treatment. We can individualize. I want to point on one important change that was made in our state budget that kind of going forward, why this moment in time is a good moment to really restructure how we do things systematically. In the state budget, very quietly, about $140 million was transferred from the Department of Corrections to the Department of Children and Families. That money is for what we call youth aids and the supervision of delinquency services. So in English, that means the Department of Children and Families is now going to supervise kids that are on paper and in our community. That is an important change for us to recognize. That is the difference of social workers supervising our children versus correctional officers supervising our children. I like that change. I think that's I think our juvenile justice system should be more aligned with our children and families and their mission of reunifying kids and growing kids than our Department of Corrections mission, which is much more supervisory and punitive. So that's a really good change. And so right now we have an administration that was willing to do a big step in what I at least feel is the right direction, or could be the right direction. And so the ball has been rolling, and it's an opportunity for us now to keep going and restructure how we incarcerate youth in Wisconsin. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Representative Barnes.
So thank you, Evan, and thank you, CBC, for even bringing up this issue again. It's very important, and I say that because the media has done a pretty good job at actually covering this. The public has done a bad job at following this. I've talked to a number of reporters who noticed the click rate on the stories they post online, and there's a very low click rate. And without the public being engaged on an issue like this, the governor, the administration, the Department of Corrections can get away with letting these abuses go on and on and on, like they have for years. Like we see with the governor ignoring this issue for 4 years when he got the letter from the judge, like when parents were not informed about sexual abuse that took place on their children. This is what happens because we have a culture in our society where if it's someone who's in prison, we sort of look at them a different way. And I don't mean us as individuals, but as a society, there's a certain way, there's a certain stigma that's attached to someone who's been to jail because a lot of people feel, oh, well, they deserve what they get. And they say, well, those are criminals. Why should we worry about what's going on with them? But it's much deeper than that, and I am fully aware that the people in this room today understand the complexity of our family members, quite frankly, our children, our friends, our neighbors, because chances are we know someone who's been through the criminal justice system just by pure statistics. In the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, with 50% of our African-American males over the age of 30 having done some time. So how do we get to that point? And we talked about a lot of the technicalities that exist, and this isn't just about Lincoln Hills. We're more passionate about it because they are our youth, and there is still more time for redemption with them than there are with some of our older offenders. But this isn't just Lincoln Hills. The policies that got us here, and thank you all for the technical component, but there is a certain political component that exists as well. And as much as we talk about the governor ignoring the issues, part of this is the way that staff relations at the Department of Corrections is handled. I'm the ranking Democrat on the Assembly Committee on Corrections, and when we had an informational hearing, the secretary came in, the then Secretary Wall came in, and he talked to us about everything that was going on, things they wanted to do, things they haven't tried yet. But he also showed us a chart that showed employment trends in the Department of Corrections. And those employment trends, it was a bar graph, and it showed the number of early retirements, it showed the number of resignations. And after 2011, the rate of early resignations, the rate of early retirements and resignations shot up after 2011. I'm not gonna over politicize this issue, and I'll just leave you with what happened in 2010, which caused that spike in 2011. I think a lot of people understand what that was. Employees at the Department of Corrections were not able to collectively bargain or talk about the issues they face. And the governor said he exempted police, firefighters because of the dangers they see on the job. But the fact is, these people who are working in not only Lincoln Hills, any of the facilities, forced overtime, repeat 16-hour shifts. No matter where you work, if you work repeat 16-hour shifts, you're not gonna have it all. If you are doing this consistently, you're not gonna have the patience that you need to work in a youth facility. You're not gonna have the patience you need to work in an adult facility. There's already tension as soon as you walk in the door because of the population. It's not a job like any other job. And we look at the high recidivism rate in the state of Wisconsin. You have parole officers, probation officers, who also have to work these repeat shifts. And it's easy for the slightest thing to get to you. If somebody shows up a minute late and you've been working 16 hours, you're not gonna have a whole lot of patience for that person. And that's why you see so many people going back to jail, going back to prison on technical violations. So that's something that we can't ignore also, because it's an abject failure. It's a complete failure, 360 degrees on so many different levels. The way we do criminal justice, the way we do corrections in the state of Wisconsin is awful. When you look at even how, where there's employee relations, it's terrible. We are setting ourselves up because this is a very volatile mixture that we have in a very small space. And that's why you see the staff on youth violence, the youth on youth violence. It's probably even staff on staff violence. So the political reality of this is, we all know people who, just like any other issue, we all know people who don't fully get it, who don't understand what's going on in Lincoln Hills. We're here because we know about it, we care, we want to hear more. But we gotta, a lot of people aren't opening up the paper and stopping to read this article. These articles, because they show up all the time. People aren't clicking, if you share this on Facebook, people aren't always clicking on these articles. There's a certain level of education that we need to do, because the people in any of our facility are wards of the state. They are our responsibility. And, Representative Goyke and I had an opportunity to go to the Lincoln Hills facility in December before the new year. And, by the time we got there, they knew we were going to be there, so we didn't get the real experience. We had a very curated experience at Lincoln Hills. There's nothing going on here. There were, students, just placed in a library that may not have been there. had we not been there. And so we did have the opportunity to talk to some people offline. I got to wrap it up. And I appreciate the community-based programming, too, that people are trying to do at Lincoln Hills, but it is the state's responsibility, and the state has failed you. So thank you.
My assignment today is to talk about the intersection between child welfare and juvenile corrections. And my name is Jermaine. I'm gonna get there. Just get there. My name is Jermaine Reed. I'm the executive director of Fresh Start Family Services, a treatment foster care agency here in Wisconsin. And before I get started, I want to, given that it's Black History Month, I would like to do two things. One is to acknowledge our ancestors who paved the way for me and for you and all the courageous leaders like the Honorable Beverlia Phillips. You all know her, and the 100 of our white brothers and sisters who have stood with us in our fight for equality and justice over the years. I want to say thank you. Dr. James Groffey, Viola Luza, and a number of folks. And the second thing that I want to do is read an excerpt from The Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs that I believe will help shed some light on historic issues confronting Black youth and parenting and some of the social issues that we have been facing. My father, by his nature, as well as by the habit of transacting business as a skillful mechanic, had more of the feelings of a free man than is common among slaves. My brother, who was a spirited boy and being brought up under such influences, he early detested the name of master and mistress. One day when his father and his mistress had happened to call upon him at the same time, he hesitated between the two, being perplexed to know which had the strongest claim upon his obedience. He finally concluded to go to his mistress. When his father reproved him for it, he said, "You both called me and I didn't know which I ought to go to first." "You are my child," replied the father, "and when I call you, you shall come immediately if you have to pass through fire and water." Poor Willie, he was now to learn his first lesson in obedience to a master. Why did I read that? Because I'm thinking about the poor Willies in our community. Those out in Lincoln Hills and those that's right out here on 9th and, I was going to say 9th and Matthew. This church's been here so long. I'm on 9th and Chambers, 9th and Locust, 9th and Chambers. I'm thinking about our youth who are in your homes, our grandchildren, our nephews, our nieces, our cousins, the poor Willies in our community who, like this child in this story, is stuck between two power structures. One being parental authority and the other system authority. And so I beg to ask the question, who has more influence over the minds and the behaviors of young Black youth, their parents, or the system? Now, Black folks, you know this, we have only been parenting legally in America for 151 years. If you factored in indentured servitude, now you're talking about 80 years, and if you dare to think about Jim Crowism, now we're down to 50 years. So when we look at this and we look at the many forms of slavery that we have dealt with and dealing with, from chattel slavery being the most famous to child labor, human sex trafficking, a number, mass incarceration of Black young boys, men and women. And so there's my segue into what's going on at Lincoln Hills. I think it's important to note that incarceration of Black youth began long before they make it to a La Crosse juvenile detention center, or Rock County, or a Racine County, or even a Lincoln Hills, but it begins in something called special education. It begins in these little silos, something called foster care. It begins when we're removing a high volume of Black children away from their families and communities, and there is a huge cultural disconnect. 68.2% of the youth who are in our local foster care system are poor Willies. 68%, according to the Department of Corrections report, 68% of those youth that were out in Lincoln Hills in 2014 were poor Willies, and 55% of them were coming from Milwaukee, and some of them Caucasian, but mostly Black. We have a problem. We have a problem because when you think about it and you look about who's influencing the behavior of youth and children, and that's increasing incarceration, we have to ask a question. My second question is the system broken or is it designed? Somebody told me the other day on my talk show, Fresh Start Today on WNOV at 860 on Wednesday at 3 p.m., they said power protects power. Black folks in Milwaukee have been dealing with the same challenges like institutional racism, social ills, and quality of life issues like police brutality, youth unemployment and education inequality, mass incarceration of black men and boys, and housing issues, the same problems that confronted us in 1960 under Mayor Henry Meyer and Police Chief Breyer. You remember that? How is it that 56 years later, we're still dealing with educational inequities? We're still dealing with mass incarceration of our children. So my concern is that if we're going to fix this problem, you know, we can't blame parents because you've taken so much power away from parents to parent their kids. There you go. And then we incarcerate their children and then we blame them and say that it's their fault. See, because poverty is real and poverty is constructed. And there are folks that benefit from poverty. And so when families can get jobs, and you know, youth unemployment was an issue back in the 60s and 70s, and it's still a problem today. So if we're going to reduce the number of the 68% in foster care and 68% of black children who are in corrections, we are going to have to support families on the ground level. Because it makes no difference whether we're talking about a Henry Meyer or we're talking about a Tom Berry. It makes no difference because those are just individuals that's part of a different system, a bigger system. There you go. And so every system has input, output. So if we want to change the output, we're going to have to program the system differently. There you go. And so I am hoping that you all look at what's going on because as it relates to, and I got 2 minutes, as it relates to the intersection of foster care, when we look at outcomes, foster children are 2 times more likely to drop out of school. 30 to 40% of children in special education or children in foster care are in special education. And I believe that number is a lot higher. Many of these children who are in Lincoln Hills in foster care, they're presenting as someone on the panel said with some serious, significantly mental health disorders, schizophrenia, bipolarism, and somebody may even say tripolarism because they got a lot going on. So when we look at outcomes and we look at the number of children, 416 black children out of 1,600, making up the 68% of foster care, 416 of them were removed outside of their county. That's traumatic. And so in order to produce, we need to have a trauma-informed system and not just talk about it. Whether we're talking about foster care, whether we're talking about Lincoln Hills, we really need to have family engagement, look at how to support these families. Another thing that we can do, and that I'm going to close, is as it relates to foster children and children who are in corrections. Many of these children, parents, we talk about family engagement. We have removed them and placed them from one type of dysfunctional, broken environment. See, because families are broken, systems are designed. There you go. So their families, we remove them from the families and we place them into these homes that are just as poverty-stricken, broken as their biological settings. There you go. And every time a child moves and creates instability, something dies in that child, which often increases the likelihood that they'll become engaged in criminal activity, dropping out of school. And last point, every time a foster child school placement is disrupted, according to the Vera Institute adjustment, they fall 4 to 6 months behind. And foster children can experience at least 2 to 3, in some cases, school placements per year. So we can do better as a system and hold ourselves and hold our elected officials accountable. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jermaine. Jermaine actually said that I should go before him, and Next time, I think I'll take him up on that. Jermaine and I have had a lot of conversations on what he was just talking about, and I am grateful for his advocacy in this community. So I'm Judge Mary Trujano. I'm the presiding judge at Children's Court. I am here at the request of Chief Judge Maxine White, who has been actually working extremely tirelessly along with my fellow colleagues out at Children's Court on this issue day and night. I see texts and emails from her 10, 11 o'clock at night trying to figure out what the judiciary should do or not do. So I have, my first 5 years was a Children's Court judge. That's where I started, that's where I landed when I first became a judge. I wanted to come back, and I was told by some of my colleagues, that's crazy. Why do you want to go back to Children's Court? And I want to go back to Children's Court, and I want to keep working at Children's Court because that is the place that makes the most difference. If we do not get it right there, we create more problems in these children's and these families' lives. We have to get it right at Children's Court. We have to think about this. We have to really work together to make it right the first time around. So yes, we have a very serious problem in Irma, Wisconsin. And as John Chisholm said, we have a serious problem in Milwaukee County. And we can't ignore either. I don't want you to go away from here thinking that in the last couple months, this is something that's just happened, right? We knew that the old correctional model was a train wreck years and years ago. There are people in the juvenile justice system, at behavioral health, in the DA's office, in the public defender's office, the judiciary, community advocates, everywhere trying to work on this issue for years. Trying to figure out how not to send kids to a place that's not working. And actually, there's been a huge reduction in kids going to correctional systems. And why is that? Because we've invested a little bit more each time in community-based outreach and services, working with Wraparound Milwaukee and other forms. Can we do better? Absolutely. Must we do better? Absolutely. So, with sort of that introduction, on behalf of the Chief Judge, I want to say that we are extremely grateful for the collaboration that has formed in this crisis situation. No one group can do this alone. And I think as Chris said, we need your help as well. We need the community to help us to address our immediate challenges, which is how do we keep our kids safe while they're there? And also to address the long-term solution. And what is that long-term solution going to look like? And do we have the courage to call Lincoln Hills and Copper Lake what it is? A train wreck, a failure. And to look at a more constructive, humane, and cost-effective system for how we want to treat our kids. And I think 6, 7, 8 of you came up to me before we started this and said, Judge, these are our kids. And they are our kids. So how are we going to treat them? How are we going to educate them? And how are we going to also hold them accountable in our system? So I think we as judges have sort of a wish list, and we are working on that with our key players that are coming to the table. And we need more options. We need more options to treat the most dangerous children who are in need of secure care facilities to treat their mental health and alcohol and drug addiction. That's a huge issue in our community. We need a balanced mix of supervision and community-based services so we can put these kids in their homes, in their communities where they will end up anyway. We need programs that understand and can treat their complex trauma. I think trauma was mentioned up here more than once. Trying to create a more trauma-informed system. What does that mean? What does that look like? Our kids are subject, in the juvenile justice system, withstand more trauma and adversity than any other population. And what that means, what that correlates to, is increased offending and reoffending if we don't give them the right attention and services. Talking about mental health and alcohol and drug addiction, the juvenile justice system and police officers should not be a child's first introduction to mental health and alcohol and drug treatment services. We are absolutely not equipped. We are resource poor when it comes to these kids, and we know it. And we try daily to patch things together to try to figure that out. But children who are in need of those kinds of services should get them long before they come to us. And that is a prevention and intervention model that really needs to be focused on. So as I said before, we can't afford to get this next step wrong. We need to work together to build a community juvenile justice system that is responsive and that is rooted in best practice research. We have some of that knowledge right now within our communities. It's good to go to Missouri and Minnesota and sort of figure out what kinds of things they have, but we have the brain power here to start doing that now, and we can't wait. We have it now and we should do it. And I agree with everyone on the panel. This has to be planful, thoughtful, and deliberate. Because if we get it wrong, it's these kids and families that are going to suffer. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I would like to, at some point, meet with Evan and Mandela, especially about this new transfer of dollars. I'm very concerned. For the last 9 years, our agency has been trying to work with the Bureau of Child Welfare, the new Bureau. And I wrote a paper 9 years ago on the fact that they treat the children with trauma-informed care, but they treat the parents like they're criminals. So now to have our younger kids over in that system, the fact that they have a name of a social worker behind their names, most of them are not. And the ones who do who care or want to do it right, end up leaving. Just as Jermaine says, systems. The system sets up and says that this is how you treat these parents. Your child wouldn't have been taken from you if you hadn't done something wrong. That's not true. We've seen over and over again where parents should not have had their kids taken in the first place. So I would like to talk to you about that. I'm also, I've met with some people and we're looking, at some point we may ask for a federal investigation of the child welfare system. That's how serious it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McManus. Just in response, I didn't mean to endorse ringingly the Department of Children and Families like this is going to be the cure. But we know that our Department of Corrections isn't the cure. And so I'm hopeful that a change can be part of a larger change that's needed. I'm not saying that this is going to be the solution. But the reason why I brought this up is that it is an example currently underway of rethinking how our whole juvenile justice system works. I'm telling you right now that the legislature 6 months ago, 9 months ago approved that change. So when we come up talking about ways that we can work, we're not shouting into the wind. And I brought up the change from DOC to DCF as proof that there's room to work in Madison on this issue. A lot of times I stand up in this room and it seems like I'm praying for rain from Madison. That I'm advocating for ideas that, quite honestly, because of the politics and the partisan makeup of the Capitol right now, are never going to go anywhere ever. But right now, at this moment in time, and what's happening in the system right now, we have an opening to advocate for and see huge change in our system. And I bring that up just so that we don't let the Lincoln Hills investigation end in the resignation of the Secretary of DOC and that's it. That we can push further and that there's openings for that in Madison.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I forgot to mention that just last week my office called on the Attorney General to investigate what's going on in Lincoln Hills. So that's just one of the steps we're taking. Also, I got like a handful of blue books down here for people that want them. So, and I'll be right back. I'm not leaving the panel. I just got to step out for 1 second.
My question is about resources. Are the resources of not having enough personnel to carry out the programs that need to be carried out? Is it because there's not enough money, or there aren't enough people coming out of our college and university systems so that there aren't enough people available?
Yeah, this is a really good question. One of the things you hear when you go on the curated tour, and I also went on the curated tour of Lincoln Hills, is, and this is the one thing that I think I actually believe them, they have an incredibly difficult time when you're 20 minutes north of Wausau. You know, they're not near a density of population anywhere, and nationally there's a difficulty in hiring good CEOs, and up there it's just magnified. Worse yet, you know, the reason that the FBI and the civil rights component of the investigation is because 100% of that staff is white. And I heard this when I was up there, and I think Representative Goyke and Barnes heard this as well. Some of the folks who are working with our youth aren't too keen on trauma-informed care. In fact, they kind of resent the idea, and there's some of them that think it's the problem. So the notion that it's ever going to get better up there, you know, is just silly. Now that said, can we do better? A couple of years ago, the county took over the management of the House of Corrections, and the House of Corrections went from a place where you had no programming at all to a place where you've got probably as much programming, GEDs, job certification, all that, as just about any place else. And they have done a good job being able to hire, but the issue is up there, they're never gonna, I mean, the answer to your question up there, no, they won't.
But down here, too.
Right. Yeah, I think it's still a challenge, but what you've seen at the House of Correction, though, is you've got now, I mean, we don't get to say it can't be done because we're doing it at a much higher level. I mean, it's programming, it's, you know, automatically enrolling people in the Affordable Care Act. I mean, it's getting people, who's doing what we're supposed to do at corrections.
Yeah. And if I could add, it requires, it's not just that there's not enough, but it's a different kind of model that requires a different kind of training, and quite frankly, just a completely different culture. And so if you're, for example, supervising 10 kids at one time, and you've got a master's degree, and you've got you know, just this intense experience, long-term experience. Like I said, this didn't happen overnight in Missouri. This was started in the 1980s, and it is now a model, but it took them a long time to get to where they're at.
You know, if I can say something in terms of resources, as relates to child welfare, I think what is really important is cultural inclusion and not just cultural competence. I think there's a difference between those two. And so if we're going to service those children in foster care as well as those in Lincoln Hills, we need to have a group, a pool of resources that look like them, that understand them, that can work with them. We need black organizations at the table, and I think historically the system has done a phenomenal job of locking us out. And so I think that we're really going to help these children, especially when it comes to mental health services, because African Americans, you know, we have some issues around counseling. So, but it's needed. And so we need to have folks that we trust to be a part of that process. So.
Oh, okay. Ms. Martha has asked me to announce that the panel talk a little louder because people are talking in the back. My question is for Representative Mandela and Goyke. Wondering if the two of you could possibly support the movement of juvenile corrections to DCF, the people who deal with children and families, of course with taking under consideration Dr. McManus's concerns as she's brought forward. Just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Thank you. So as I announced in my comments earlier, in the governor's budget, and it was approved in the legislature, community supervision and youth aids was transferred from the DOC to the Department of Children and Families. What was not transferred was jurisdiction over the facilities, or those children that are under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections having been in the facilities. I have met with the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, and she very much does not want the jurisdiction over those institutions and Why does she not want that? Because that system is so horribly broken that nobody would want to step in and own Lincoln Hills. However, in my opinion, it gives us the opportunity to create a new structure for juvenile incarceration in Wisconsin. And in my opinion, obviously I'm biased, I wrote the bill about the Missouri model, but this decentralized regional facilities, and maybe a component of developing this new system would have a new department in charge of it. So maybe that's the right time to change from the DOC to DCF. And there are issues there. I'm not saying that they're the greatest agency that we've ever created, but their mission statement is more in line with the rehabilitation of our children and the reunification of their families than the DOC, and other states have done that change.
I'd like to also mention that we as a judiciary, as a justice system, really look at those kids that we call them crossover kids, right, for lack of a better word, kids who touch our child welfare system and our juvenile justice system. And we try to work collaboratively with both systems to address the needs of the kids. So if there are kids in Lincoln Hills that are on their way out that might not have a home to go to, that child welfare system needs to kick back in to help provide services to that child, a placement, those kinds of options. So we keep our eye on those kids as much as we can. Many of those kids, when they leave corrections, are aging out of the system, right? You put them in there at age 13, they end up coming out at 17, 17 and a half. That was one of the, certainly the problems that we saw, and it's an ongoing issue. But how are we going to help those children get back, integrate into the community, get the right treatment, training, placement, resources? And so having that housed in DCF would be an interesting to pursue.
Hello, this is for all of our panelists, and it's just a statement. We're up here talking about housing criminals, and there's many ways that they get there, and not all of them are where they have attacked someone, so they're not all aggressive like that. There's just many reasons, and we all know that there's other reasons other than that. My statement is, because the institution, though, and I'm sorry, I'm very caught up with this, but because the institutions actually think of our kids as low life, so they're definitely doing their job, and if their job is to incarcerate criminals, and if those criminals look more easy to incarcerate if they're low life, but my point is, why aren't they arresting criminals? Because these people that in these institutions that we are talking about, that's running it and getting these monies, and that are directing these people and letting this go and turning the other cheek and eye and everything else, need to be arrested.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody on the panel agrees. You know, we've spent a lot of resources, time, and energy at the county level and throughout the criminal justice system to try and keep people from getting into incarceration or even, you know, in the criminal justice system in the first place. Secondly, at Lincoln Hills, as a number of us mentioned, you've got a wide range of who's up there. There are some people, yes, who are the serious juvenile offenders, but there's a lot of people who, I know a lot of our folks at delinquency think, you know, don't need to be in that facility, shouldn't be in that facility. And to the point about what the incentives are here, back to what I said about $325 per kid per day. And you heard a number of us talk about this. We're sending less people up there. We're trying to refer less people up there, and they're holding them longer. And the reason I think they're holding them longer is they get more money to do that. One of the things we've asked for numerous times is, hey, Lincoln Hills, give us a record of how many of the youth you start on a program, some educational program, they get assigned when they come up there, you know, an 8-month program, a 4-month program, a year program, how many of those kids finish on time? And when I asked directly when I was up there, I heard the, I'm not really sure. And I said, okay, ballpark it. And the person I asked said, the majority. And I said, okay, 51%, 99%, 75, you know, just ballpark it. Well, we really can't, I don't have that data offhand. I said, can you just give us the database? We'll do the math, we'll work it out. Yeah, no, we're not sure we have that. Call me skeptical, but What I do know is they're holding people longer. They're getting more money per kid, for those longer stays. That's, when we talk about everybody up here, why we need the public, and Mandela said this, and he's right. We talk about this. We need to hold the spotlight on information like that, not just the abuses, but the sort of system behind it, to get some pressure and to get change.
Just very briefly, and we can't ignore the fact that, again, there's a small percentage, a subset, that are committing extraordinarily dangerous acts and have immediate consequences for that because of the danger that they pose, again, both to themselves and to the community. So the public safety issue has to remain in the conversation, front and center. Everybody agrees with that as well. Here's one, since we're talking about legislative change a little bit, other jurisdictions that have had more success have what is called blended jurisdiction. In other words, they don't make such a firm distinction between the juvenile system and the adult system. They allow more flexibility for those who are from 16 to 24 years of age. By flexibility, right now, it essentially means, you've got a couple years, if you elect to use the juvenile justice system, you've got a couple years in which to intervene, in which case they're released from that system. And as we've seen, we've got these high recidivism rates. Recidivism means they're in the adult system from that point on. So one approach to it would be to create a system that's more flexible, that allows the system and more opportunities to monitor young people as they're changing, as they're evolving. So it's not an all or nothing. You either send them into the adult system or you keep them in the juvenile system. There should be a bridge between those that allow us to monitor particularly the riskiest kids, the kids that are engaged in violent offenses.
Thank you. Disability Rights Wisconsin provides advocacy assistance to youth with disabilities who are housed at these facilities. One of our advocacy specialists was just at Copper Lakes and spoke with young women with disabilities who are in solitary confinement for 22 hours a day. That's unacceptable. So I would ask the panel how we can take action to stop that now. And in addition, given that as many as 75% of these youth have disabilities and special education needs, what more can we do on the front end to invest in mental health, in other kinds of treatment for individuals with disabilities, and in special education services to stop the pipeline?
Well, you're absolutely 110% right. Up at Lincoln Hills, they call it a security cottage, aka solitary confinement. There used to be 2 of those security cabins or cottages on the boys' side, and now there is one, with talks of possibly reopening the second. And they have, on Representative Barnes and I, on our curated tour, talked to us about the rules and how an individual would get moved into the security cottage and how they get moved out. And it seems to me that that entire system is very arbitrary and ineffective and should be absolutely stopped or changed or modified. But I want to address a different point. About 4 weeks ago, in front of the Joint Committee on Finance in Madison, the Department of Health Services came forward asking for about $16 million more to expand capacity at the Mendota Mental Health Facility in Madison. We have a capacity issue in our state-run mental health hospital in Mendota, and we are seeing people with mental health disorders, disabilities, sitting in jails, sitting in our youth prison, when they should be in a less secure, more treatment-oriented facility. We have one in Oshkosh called Winnebago and one in Madison called Mendota, and they need more space. And so it is the resources, and this was approved. The $16 million was approved, so capacity will be increased in Mendota. It should have been tripled, because the alternative is, well, first of all, they shouldn't even be in if they can be in the community, which obviously everyone on the panel supports. But we shouldn't just put them in prison, because that's the destination of last resort for our criminal justice system.
Thank you for raising that issue. So when I mentioned before that we're sort of taking a short-term, medium-term, and long-term approach, the short-term approach is get people on the ground there that can assess and monitor and watch these kids, even if they have to walk them to school, to make sure we know what's going on as a system back here. So one of the things that's happening right now is Delinquency Court Services is hiring people to go up and be our eyes and ears, but we have Wraparound Milwaukee who's been doing assessments of these kids on a regular basis, and I think they've probably got through at least 30, 40, 50 kids by now. Create a document that gets back to the court noting just what you're saying. If they have been in solitary confinement, we need to know and we want to know what's going on. Whether or not we can create a different plan for that child and whether or not public safety and all those things are taken into consideration. So, but I'd like to talk with you more later about this so that we may have those resources and understand what they are in the community as well.
How you doing? I'm Torrey Johnson. I'm the founder and president of X-Men United. I was able to go up to Lincoln Hills about a month ago, and the bus was the people that was there that count, but it was empty, you know. And one of my whole things is my mother died when I was 2 months. My father died when I was 7, so I'm a product of Ethan Allen and the penitentiaries, you know. And then I see one person back there, I'm gonna bust him out, Mr. Celine Elamine from New Horizon. I wonder why, like, when I go all these committees, I don't be seeing Celine Elamine there, you know what I'm saying? Because Celine Elamine helped me as a kid, and he also helped me when I came out to penitentiary. Over and over, every time I came in, he never turned his back on me. And since I see him transferring over to foster care and daycare and all that, and I see he been getting attacked, I just be wanting to know, because I see a lot of people that's now all of a sudden they all about our kids, but it's like it's back to that money thing. It's no different from Lincoln Hill. It's a money thing. You be like, where y'all come from? You know what I'm saying? And I had a question for Mr. Mandela, because there's a few people that I know that called your office in the beginning of all this, and we got no response. No response. I hear you talking now, but we got no response from your office, you know what I'm saying, when it came to our kids from the beginning of this. So I'm gonna let you respond to that. But that's the whole thing that irks me the most, is that you see people that care, and then you see people that say they care. You know what I'm saying? And it hurts the most, because, you know, the room is packed today. You know what I'm saying? The other day I ain't see nobody. You know what I'm saying? Because now it's all on the news. They taking time to take interviews while we talking, because I wanted to talk to Mr. Abley too. You know what I'm saying? It's like the importance of our kids, they can wait.
I'm going to pause just a moment to recognize our mayor, Mayor Barrett, I understand is here, and Alderperson Malaley Cobb. Would you stand? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If you could tell me when you reached out to my office, I would really appreciate that. We could do an hour offline, either or. But we have a record of everybody that's contacted us. And even the news did open records requests of all the emails we received about Lincoln Hills. So everybody that emailed, contacted our office, we responded to. I mean, as soon as the first story broke in the Journal Sentinel, our office has been sure to step out and contact anybody who's been in touch with us, try to get in touch with us. I mean, we've been open for answers for anybody. I mean, I've been talking about this since December.
Then we say stories. This been happening for years. This
Right, I
ain't
understand.
nothing new. So just being as a legislative person, you know this happening for years. We ain't got to wait for the kid, the booty to start bleeding to know that they being abused up there. So when you get in a position, you're supposed to actually start attacking all them areas, or you part of the system too.
I've never been a part of this. That's why I ran for office. Criminal justice reform is one of the biggest issues that I talked about. It's something I worked on before I was elected. So any contact about anything with the Department of Corrections, my office has been responsive to. I will apologize if we didn't get back in touch with you, but like anybody who's emailed you, if you can open records request my office
So
now,
you
anybody.
agree with the recommendations that the legislation committee had recommended for the kids, the ones they talking about up there now?
You talking about bringing them back to Milwaukee?
Or whatever.
I think it's important. It's like I said, I supported the Missouri model, which requires more geographically dispersed locations closer to Milwaukee, where parents have access to the students, where family members can have access to their students, because that's the #1 key part. It's an integral part of the rehabilitation process. So
But we don't have to go to Missouri.
No, we don't have to go to Missouri.
Realize that, John.
Right, I understand. Right,
We need to make a Milwaukee model.
we have to be as we got to be as creative as possible. I'm all for that. Like
There's people in here and other places that need to sit down and make a model of our own and stop thinking that we got.
Excuse me, sir, did you talk to Mandela after this session? Okay, thank you.
I want to make one thing clear, and that is that the reason that there is a state and federal investigation was because as far back as October of 2014, information that was actually brought to us by the Public Defender's Office here in Milwaukee was brought to our office. We consulted with the chief judge. We took immediate action on it, and that's what launched the investigation. You have to also be aware that even though Ethan Allen and Wales was not an ideal setting, it was a better setting for Milwaukee youth than Lincoln Hills. And quite frankly, when the two of them operated together, they had a little bit more flexibility. When they got rid of Ethan Allen and Wales, you didn't have any people that had grown up in Milwaukee working as correctional officers up in Lincoln Hills. Let's put it that way. And so as soon as this information was brought to our attention, we took immediate action on it, and that's what resulted in the investigation.
Good morning, folks. First and foremost, there will be an empowering youth listening session with the Department of Justice and young people March 4th at 5:30 at the Wisconsin Historical Society. I encourage people, we had one with adults, this is going to be strictly about youth. And I encourage folks, there's flyers on the table in the back. I'm County Supervisor Supreme Moral Mukunde of the 10th District. And first and foremost, I've only heard it mentioned a couple times, but we have Lincoln Hills and we also have Copper Lake, where our young ladies are as well. And when I first got news of what was happening, I saw it on the news and in the Journal Sentinel. I was reading. I want to give a shout out to Kelly Bablich, who is the chief of staff of the county board, and also used to work for Congresswoman Gwen Moore when she was in the state Senate, and worked on some of these issues. We worked together to try to put forth some legislation and talk about some things. I think the catalyst of the county's involvement started at the county board when, during our finance committee, I made a motion that we not send money to organizations who were doing work at Lincoln Hills. This is right after the news broke. We're like, I said, I don't want to give them money to send our young people up there. And then there was a piece of legislation that I did on the county board where I urged, and Judge Triciano may be familiar with this, I urged our judges not to send our young people up to Lincoln Hills or places like that. This has been happening for years, and the things that you hear in the media only scratch the surface. I've been in contact with individuals like Nate Bowie, who was a person in Lincoln Hills. He lived there and worked there and was housed there. I'll say it like that. He talked to me about pepper gassing. He talked to me about broken bones, limbs having to be taken off of feet. And he said anybody could get messed up any kind of way. They would pepper gas the entire facility, and then you would have to cover your mouth for an hour after it happened, up at Lincoln Hills and at Copper Lake. And also, so what we did, myself, supervisors, Marina Dmitrievich, and also Chairman Lipscomb, we then had a series of legislation which talked about the Missouri model, which talked about some different trauma-informed care. And it's only Missouri model because it worked in Missouri. It can work anywhere. It talks about trauma-informed care because not only are some of these children traumatized by some of the things they've been through in their lives, but now they're doubly traumatized by what's happening to them right now. So now they have to get over two things and not just one. And so we worked on some legislation, and we have put dollars on the table. We have proposed to put $500,000 that helps the process of bringing our children home more quickly. These are our babies. We don't want to feed them, keep feeding them to this beast, and continue that prison to pipeline, that school to prison pipeline that we have. And we're also waiting in the March cycle. I know the county executive, we have sent legislation to him asking him to come with a plan on how we get our young people back to Milwaukee and back where families can get to their children. And because part of their recovery and part of their recuperation is having their family close to them. Because when you're 3.5 hours away, you may think my mama don't care about me because she don't come see me. But you don't know that your mama don't have a car can't make it to the airport, much less 3.5 hour ways to see you. And so We want to bring our young people back home so that they can have some processes where they can heal from what's happened to them in their lives, but also what's happening to them at the hands of those who are supposed to care about them. And so we'll be waiting on that report from that plan from County Executive Abley.
Yeah, I'd love to, again, echo a lot of what Supervisor Moore said, and I was grateful for the board when we made that request for more staff. They very quickly acted and funded it. The board has been great about this, sharing the concern of everybody up here, which is we have to do better. And understands, like everybody up here, we have to do it as responsibly as possible without compromising safety. Nobody wants to compromise public safety, but to do better with programming. And the two numbers, if you leave here and there's nothing else you remember, Lincoln Hills has 65% recidivism. We have programs at the county that similar kids that are closer to 10 to 15, which produces more crime. And the reason they do effective is because they're better programming, more intense. So I'm grateful to the board for funding that staff. We've got county staff up there right now, and there's going to be more, and we're working as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alan Schultz. I'm actually a former graduate of Ethan Allen School for Boys. I'm in complete agreement with everybody here with talking about the Missouri model and moving towards moving all of these youth back down here. I would also like to say that there is other funding that, as a challenge to you or a commitment from you, that I would like to see more of any of the criminal justice allocated funding on the state level as well as the county level being reinvested into this Missouri model like ASAP, like immediately, including the $180 million that's being proposed for the new county courthouse. I would really like to see a large chunk of that money being put into these children being brought back down here. Thank you.
So, as I said before, the county pays the state, which runs the facility, but we do that through youth aids, and that funding follows the kids. So I couldn't agree more. Getting it down here is the right thing to do, and the funding follows the kids. So that funding, those jobs, that treatment, all would move from north of Wausau to down here, so we could get better outcomes, absolutely. And just for the record, the price on the courthouse, you know, we're looking at our facilities all the time. That's nothing we're looking at, planning on doing right now. That's about the cost. And we're thinking maybe 2019, 2020 to get there. But we have a big list of priorities. This, though, right now, these kids is much higher on the priority list, much higher.
Okay, my name is Larissa Taylor, and I was also a candidate for the 2nd District. So my name was 3rd when we actually had the election. So I came in 3rd place. But I'm up today to reiterate some of the things that have been said. These things have been happening for a long time. So a little bit about my background. I've been 20 years working with youth from corrections to education. So today I'm a special education teacher with MPS or an MPS charter school now, but 10 years with MPS. So what I don't want to happen is, but this is great discussion about what's happening at Lincoln Hills now. It's great that we're starting to respond to some of the things that has happened. I don't want us to ever forget about Tachita, because Tachita, women in prison, you're going through things outside, you get in prison, and now you got to go through more things inside. So I don't want us to forget about them either. And I also want to start looking at things from the front end, because as a special education teacher, and I heard Jermaine mention it, we're dealing with issues in the classroom. I have students that are schizophrenic already, and now we have to be able to work and educate them. But if you ask MPS, we don't have the funds sometimes to provide that treatment that they need when they come into the classroom to help us be able to educate them. So I just got up because I don't want us to miss that is also part of the equation. And when we talk about dealing with things on the front end, we need to really start with what we're doing in the educational system. Yes.
My name is Rose Steets, and I read in the paper, if it's true, that Mr. Litcher, who is now the acting head, was the head of the Supermax in Mount Horeb when the scandal happened over there. Please look into it.
Hi, my name is Veronica King, and I wear a number of hats. One, I'm the state secretary for the NAACP. I'm the Kenosha branch president. I'm the state criminal justice chair. I'm a DOC employee. I am a union member, and I am an internal whistleblower. Okay? Internal whistleblower. I go to work every day and I'm blowing the whistle on the Department of Corrections. And I don't work in the juvenile division. I work in the adult division. The problems are systemic. So I encourage you, keep reading the newspaper because there's a lot to come. That's all I got to say.
Hello, I'm State Representative LaTanya Johnson, and I am also the ranking member for Children and Families. To address one of the questions about the legislature knowing about these issues before it actually hit the media. My office is, the Department of, Children and Families Committee is responsible statutorily for reviewing 90-day egregious reports of child abuse and neglect. That means any case of child abuse and neglect that arose to egregious injury or death of a child, that 90-day report is reviewed at the end of the year by the Children and Families Committee for the State Assembly, and there's also a review that's supposed to be done for the State Senate. My office went back 2013, no reports from Lincoln County. 2014, no reports from Lincoln County. 2015, no reports for Lincoln County. So what does that mean? That means that those instances were never referred to Child Protective Services so these reports could be originated. My committee asked questions about why were these reports not filed, because that is one of the ways that the legislature could know what's actually going on with these children at these residential facilities. Our ranking chair on the Republican side said there will be no questions asked about Lincoln Hills. No questions asked about Lincoln Hills. And I'm not gonna lie, I have an issue with the way our children are being treated. Not just at Lincoln Hills, but the Department of Children and Families too. 15 children died with special needs over 5 years that had some contact with Child Protective Services. 15 kids. So when we talk about systemic issues and problems with our child welfare system, it doesn't start at Lincoln Hills. It starts with the Department of Children and Families. It starts with our children in out-of-home care. And the cycle continues. My office did an open records request on the Department of Children and Families involving the backlog of cases that were in need of initial assessments right here in the city of Milwaukee. Almost 3,000 backlogged cases. That means when you call in and you report that there's a child in danger of child abuse and neglect, there's an initial assessment that happens for these children. We're talking about almost 3,000 backlogged cases. The director of the Bureau of Child Welfare, Milwaukee Child Welfare at the time, wrote Eloise Anderson's administration a letter begging for additional resources so they could get these initial assessments taken care of. She stated in this letter that she was afraid that they were putting children's lives at risk and a child would die. May 21st, a child did die. And his case was still in the initial assessment stage. Do you know when that administration signed the authority to get additional funds for the city of Milwaukee to take care of that initial assessment? May 27th, 7 days after that child died. So this administration has a history of not doing right by children, period. So Lincoln Hills, as horrible as this situation is, it's not the first. And that's something that we all should be aware of. And as a state legislature, you can only do what your authority allows you to do. When you're overwhelmed or outnumbered by the Republican Party, the media is all you have to get attention to these cases. And if we don't get enough outcry from the media, these cases never get resolved. They never get the attention that they need, and children continue to hurt and be killed in this system. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Lipscomb. I happen to be the municipal judge in the North Shore Municipal Court. I've been a judge for 18 years. Everybody thinks children's court is the beginning. It is not. I'm seeing cases in my court that I used to see as a lawyer in children's court. They're not going to children's court because they're not as serious as what's going out there. You need to be aware that municipal courts are where most kids start. I have no resources. I have no options. It's designed as a punitive system. Okay? I have a kid. He's on his third ticket for retail theft. I had not even had a chance to see him on his first one yet by the time he got the third one. 3 different instances. We need resources at a lower level before they have to get to children's court, and there is nothing. I don't know that there's anything this panel can deal with, but we need to deal with something even at that level as well. Thank you.
Hi, Regina Harmon, and I'm a social worker for Milwaukee County, and I've been doing street social work my way, my style, even with Child Protective when Milwaukee County had that. And I worked a lot with the Chips and Gyps kids, was children in need of protection and services, but they also were delinquents. And I had a sister who's retired down and moved out of Wisconsin, and she worked for Department of Corrections. She worked at the Winnebago Resource Center, Wales. She worked the intensive juvenile monitoring system that the state ran. And then they eliminated that program. And I'm thinking, what can be done to bring back the intensive juvenile monitoring program that used to have in different municipalities? I said, what can be done to bring back the intensive juvenile monitoring program that the state used to run? They had eliminated all those jobs.
It's a program that existed before my time. I'm going to give you my card and call me. And it's all about resources, right? And one of the speakers and commenters earlier talked about justice reinvestment strategies. So one of the things we can do at the state is instead of spending $1.4 billion a year on our adult system, get smarter on who and how we lock up folks in the adult system, save a couple, I don't know, $100 million, and reinvest it in places that need more resources like the supervision of children or the Department of Children and Families. So, but I'd like to know more about your program because admittedly I'm not sure exactly what it was.
One question.
One question.
Short statement.
Please, thank you. I have one question. Why isn't there a juvenile detention center in the center of Milwaukee like we have the city jail? We have the big city jail on State Street. Why isn't there just a juvenile detention center in the center of city Milwaukee? Thank you.
Well, that's the crux of it, because we decided not to do it that way. That's the shortest answer. We have the system that we decided to have, and so we're in the position now of ideally rethinking that, and that's where the Missouri model comes from, is the notion that you'd have not just one but multiple systems with the flexibility to address that issue.
Could you tell him that you're the district attorney? Okay. Yeah, okay. So I know you're
Thank
district attorney, but who is we? Who is we as a community?
This is a historical decision that it actually dates to the it dates to the point in time when they actually tried to separate juvenile offenders from the criminal justice system completely. That's why you have a children's court that is literally physically located out in the county, because it was a different concept. The notion would be that you would treat children very different
Then there were changes in law that required that you add more process and more process, and slowly the juvenile system became more like the adult criminal system in some respects. And so that's sort of the history of how we came to where we're at right now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your participation, but it doesn't stop here. We hope that we have motivated you to get on your phones, your Facebook, your Twitter, and your whatever, and get our legislators behind this whole movement to improve our juvenile correction system. Do not just sit here and listen to people. Get out and vote. Get out and use all of your social media and any other type of media to get this thing corrected. Thank you again, and I'll turn it over to our chairperson.
An MCM production.